Welcome back, everyone. This is Frank DeMore, the End Times Research Ministry. Yesterday, I posted a video for you about a false flag that a reporter from the UK was talking about. And the reason why I am going to post this again is because there's some other news that came out today in relation to this issue. It's very, very important considering what's going on in Syria and how the United States really is being an aggressor and wants to bomb Syria to get rid of Bashar al-Assad's regime, as President Barack Hussein Obama is supporting the rebels who are actually the enemy of Israel. And we're supposed to be friends with Israel, and I know that doesn't make sense, but who can make sense of what the White House is doing these days? But in light of that, two things of importance before you watch these very important videos. Jesus told us that you were going to hear about wars and rumors of wars. You could see this when you look into Matthew chapter 24, verse 6. And he says this, "And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." So we're to expect the rumors. We're here. They're here almost every single day. Now, one of the wars, obviously, that Christ knew about, and it was already written in the Bible, in the Old Testament, was the war, Psalm 83. Now, in this war, you'll see that Syria is one of the nations that are going to be joining with the rest of their Muslim brothers to attack Israel in the last days. So I'm just going to concentrate on Syria right here, and on the Palestinians, who are the modern day Palestinians, but in the Old Testament they were the Phoenicians. You can see here in number 8, Phoenicia. And Hamas is one of the groups of the Phoenicians or the Palestinians that are in the Gaza Strip, which brings us up to the present day, because that's exactly where these people are and that's who they are. So knowing about the Gaza Strip and who's there with the Hamas and the Hezbollah, they're all mentioned as people coming against Israel in the last days. So the major problem right now is Syria. Syria is in crisis. The United States wants to take them out. Now, as I showed you yesterday, in my video yesterday, I posted a video you see below from the UK warning of a false flag attack that the US will use to bomb Syria's Assad. Now, if you missed this video, watch this video first and the video below it. And today they hint that the rebels are going to use chemical weapons on Israel and blame Assad, which, if carried out, would give Obama strength for the votes he needs to start the bombing of Syria. And of course, if this does happen, then we may be very, very, very close to the beginning of the Psalm 83 war, because I personally believe, and there's others who've been following prophecy that know prophecy believe, that Syria may be the key that will launch this Psalm 83 war. And very briefly, let me explain. If Syria goes down, knowing that Israel is attacking them, and the Arab brothers see what Israel does to Syria, I believe that the Arab ties, their fellowship, if you will, this confederacy that the Lord talks about in Psalm 83, will take the United States as the aggressor, and they will take revenge out on Israel and try to attack altogether to take out Israel and fulfill Psalm 83. That's a likely scenario. So knowing that, yesterday in this video out of the UK, you will see that this reporter is warning about a false flag that might come. And he talks about weeks or in even days. So I'm going to play this, and then you'll see why this is so important with the news that came out today.
And the reaction now from British journalist and broadcaster Neil Clark. Mr. Clark, welcome to RT. Great to see you. How likely is Damascus to comply with the Russian initiative? Does the Syrian government have any alternatives there?
Well, I think it's a very good move from Syria and Russia, isn't it? But I think we've got to be very careful here, because we've got to remember that Libya gave up its chemical weapons in 2004. And we all know what happened to Libya. Iraq gave up its WMDs, and we all know what happened to Iraq. By contrast, North Korea didn't disarm, hasn't surrendered a single weapon, and North Korea is still standing. So I think if Syria were to surrender its chemical weapons, I think it needs to get a firm guarantee from Russia that if there was an attack by America, then they would come to their defence, because I think we need to deter the US attack here.
But still, Obama's made it clear the plans for a military strike are still in full force. Is the Russian initiative likely to stall them for long? What do you think?
Well, I think the Washington elite is very divided. I think Obama is very hesitant, but of course we've got the fanatical neocon lobby, the people like John McCain. And we all know that this chemical weapons issue, Yulia, was all a pretext. It was a pretext. I mean, you know, the US wants regime change in Syria, and that was just the first pretext that came along this month. And there'll be another one coming along. So even if Syria does surrender its weapons, then the danger's not over yet for Syria, because I'm sure that Washington will come along in a few months' time or even weeks' time and say, look, there's been another so-called atrocity carried out by the President Assad's government, and then we'll be back to square one again. So I think the only thing that can stop the bullying of Syria really is, as I say, is defence pact with Russia, perhaps bringing in Iran, China to deter aggression. I think that's the only thing that will stop this threat of war really.
But still, the US public, as well as a lion's share of lawmakers, are still against that intervention. Is that enough to deter an attack order at the White House?
Everyone's against this war. You know, everyone across the world except a tiny group of neocon fanatics. These people are the people trying to push President Obama to war with Syria. They're desperate for regime change against Damascus because they want to target Iran, topple the Iranian regime. And these people are absolutely fanatics. And no matter what Syria does, these people will still be targeting Syria. And yet, you know, things have changed. There's been a sort of global awakening as to the neocon agenda. People have woken up after war, after war, after war. People across the world are finally saying, no more war. And the elites in Washington have got this problem. They would love to bring about regime change in Damascus. They really want that. The only thing that's going to bring that about is war, but the public are 70-80% against war. So they've got this big problem now, the elites all across the Western world, really.
Right. What kind of action can we expect the Syrian rebels to take in the meantime?
I think there's a real danger of a false flag operation against Israel now. I think there's a real danger that it's clearly that the latest chemical weapons attack hasn't done the trick, really, as far as the warmongers are concerned. Nobody's really bought it. Obama's not going to get his war at the moment as things stand. So I think there's a real danger, Yulia, that there will be some kind of false flag attack. There will be some attack on Israel that will be blamed on Hezbollah.
See what he's talking about? A false flag chemical, probably against Israel. You're going to see the importance of this as we continue on with the next video. Well, let's go on.
Hezbollah or Assad. And that would try to get Congress then. If that happened, that would be a game changer because, you know, you'd have Obama coming out saying our strongest ally Israel's been attacked. We've got to do something now. And that could change Congress's opinion, which at the moment looks as if they're going to oppose war. So I think we've got to be on the alert, really, for false flag operations in the next few weeks or days even.
All right, British.
And again, I stress that he said even in days. Now I'm going to go to the second video for you so that you can see the news that came out today.
And while world powers are tied up in rhetoric, a number of sources have told RT that rebel forces are planning to launch a provocation attack using chemical weapons against Israel. Paula Sleer has the story from Tel Aviv.
I've spoken to both the Israeli Foreign Ministry as well as the Army spokesperson's unit, and I was asking them for their reaction to the reports we have that there is an imminent threat being planned by Syrian rebels originating in territory in Syria that is controlled by the Syrian government against Israel. Now, the reaction was, to quote one of the spokespeople, far-fetched. The other response was simply a refusal to comment. As of yet, no reaction in the Israeli press. It's difficult to say whether or not we expect such a reaction because very often this country is reluctant to comment publicly. Certainly the officials don't want to go on record giving any kind of statements of what is happening inside Syria. But the information we are getting, and this is from sources that are close to, is that, as I say, this attack will originate in Assad-controlled territory, but it will be carried out by the rebels. The result of this is that the blame will be firmly put on the shoulders of the Assad regime. Now, at the same time, the important point to make is that there has been a report that has just been released by the leading Israeli counter-terrorist think tank, and this report does talk about the possibility of unconventional weapons falling into the hands of terrorist groups in inside Syria. Israelis are concerned that chemical stockpiles will fall into, quote, the wrong hands. And for Israelis, this really is the hands of Hezbollah. And although Israeli officials have not in the past gone on record admitting this, it's widely understood that Israel has carried out at least 4 strikes inside Syria at weapon delivery supplies to the Hezbollah militants and to the Hezbollah organization. Of course, Israel would rather prefer Assad stay in power. There's no love lost between the two countries, but it's almost like that old saying, better the devil you know than the devil you don't know, from the Israeli side. I want to also bring your attention to the information we're receiving from a Belgian researcher who was recently released from having been held captive by Syrian rebels inside that country, and he was held by them for 5 months, and he has said that he denies that the Syrian president was responsible for this notorious gas attack that took place on a village near Damascus in which more than 1,000 civilians were allegedly gassed to death.
Domenico and I have a moral duty to say that it's not the Bashar al-Assad government that used sarin or any other gas in the Damascus suburb of Ghouta. We're certain of that after a conversation we overheard, even though it cost me to say so, because I've supported the Free Syrian Army passionately in its fair fight for democracy.
Now, this Belgian national says he has this information because he overheard a conversation between his captors in which they said as much, and that is that they were responsible for this attack. But of course, we'll stay on top of the situation, waiting to see if there's any kind of Israeli official reaction to these reports of a potential rebel strike against this country.
And with America firmly putting the blame for any use of weapons of mass destruction on the Syrian regime, the U.S. National Security Advisor Susan Rice has also warned of a direct chemical threat to Israel.
By terrorizing civilians, creating even greater refugee flows, and raising the risk that deadly chemicals would spill across borders into neighboring Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, and Iraq. And obviously the use of chemical weapons also directly threatens our closest ally in the region, Israel, where people once again have readied gas masks. Every time chemical weapons are moved, unloaded, and used on the battlefield, it raises the likelihood that these weapons will fall into the hands of terrorists active in Syria, including Assad's ally Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda affiliates.
And the defense consultant Moin Raouf told my colleague Kevin Owen that the reports of Israel possibly being targeted by Syrian rebels, well, they come as no surprise.
Well, remember, the rebels have stated previously from the beginning of this year that they're going to attack Israel. This had been a stated goal from the beginning anyway. Once they had achieved their objectives in Syria, they would have gone on to Israel anyway. They kidnapped some UN observers in the Golan Heights earlier this year.
Had Israel underestimated the threat, do you think, so far?
Oh yeah, because Israel thought that once Assad leaves, there's going to be peace in the region. They had underestimated the rebels' goal, which was to start with Syria and then go on to Israel and other countries in the region.
Well, thanks for joining us here on RT today.
A number of anonymous sources close to the Syrian conflict have told RT that rebel forces are planning to launch a, quote, provocation attack using chemical weapons against Israel. Live now to RT's Paula Steer in Tel Aviv for more on this. Obviously, those concerns that are uncorroborated, but let's talk about where they may have come from and how strong they may be, those concerns being greeted very seriously in Israel.
Well, it certainly will be taken very seriously here in Israel. Nothing as of yet in the Israeli press or any kind of official comments. What we know is that RT sources are telling us that they have information that in the nearest future there will be an attack originating in the areas of Syria where the rebels are present, using certain unknown chemical weapons against the territory of Israel. Now, there are 2 important points I want to make. The first is that we are being told that these attacks will originate in territory that is being controlled by the Assad government. So what this clearly means is that the blame will go towards the Syrian regime. But on the other hand, it will be attacks that will be carried out by the Syrian rebels. As I say, no reaction as of yet here in Israel, but in the last 24 hours there have been a number of emergency drills, particularly in the north of the country, in Israel's Golan Heights. We also are hearing now from the Israeli Institute for Policy Against Terrorism. On Monday, they released a report in which they say that they have information that there are chemical weapons in Syria being housed in some 50 cities. 5 of those are cities with big factories. Now, the report is saying that the situation in these cities is constantly changing. So what this means is that sometimes the rebels are in charge, sometimes Assad's forces, and the conclusion is that there is the possibility that the rebel fighters will be in control of these weapons if and when these cities fall to their hands. The report also outlines concerns that Hezbollah or Palestinian organizations or Al-Qaeda-linked organizations will get their hands on these chemical weapons. Israel, of course, is very, very concerned about any kind of attacks on Israeli territory that will emanate from Syria. In the past, it has struck Syria at the time it said to prevent weapon delivery to Hezbollah. Of course, it's common knowledge in Israel and elsewhere that this country benefits from Assad being in power. Otherwise, Israel would have to face a whole host of characters who ultimately are going to be worse than Assad himself. Although officially, the Israeli point of view is that it is not involved inside Syria. But speaking to people here inside Israel, the Israeli point of view, by and large, is that the lesser evil is for Israel to coexist with the Assad regime. And of course, this is something that Israel has been doing for a few years. The alleged use of chemical weapons by the rebels is not something new. We've seen these allegations coming forward in the past. Of course, this is a conflict that has been laden with all kinds of provocations at all levels. We've seen horrifying pictures of dead children that were used by the Obama administration to justify a possible attack on Syria. And later it turned out that those children had in fact been kidnapped and slaughtered by the rebels with chemical weapons. Israel, of course, will take very seriously these latest claims that rebels are planning a major provocation to strike Israel from the territory currently being controlled by the Syrian government.
All right, Paula, thanks for the update there.
So the situation in the Middle East is ratcheting up again, and I guess the world will be waiting to see if this false attack comes by the rebels. When I mean false attack, they would actually use some instrument of destruction. But the message would be a false message. It would be a message that wasn't true. It wouldn't be Assad's people who did this. It would be the rebels who did this to try to get the United States to start their bombing, which the United States really is eager to do. So all in all, the words of the Lord are coming to pass. We definitely have wars that have been going on. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Egypt, we see all the uprising there. And of course, the wars that are yet to be fought, the Psalm 83 war, of which you're seeing the nations involved in this war are coming ahead, getting ready for that prophecy to be fulfilled. Now, let me just go down a little bit here because there's some other news today, and you talk about rumors of war. This time it goes between Japan and China. And I'm not going to give you the whole article, but the headline, China military tells U.S. not to engage Japan over the Isles. There's a dispute about these little islands, and we may see some conflict there. At least that's the direction that it's going right now, and China has already spoken to the United States about hands-off. So it looks like they're telling the United States this because they're going to do something. And again, will this happen? Is it just a rumor? I don't know. But I do know this. The words of Christ are definitely being fulfilled. Wars and rumors of war. God bless.